right, so we've created a trigger that can open our door only when the player is standing inside of that trigger and presses the E key. But there's one problem. Our player doesn't really know when they're in the trigger or not. And we don't want to have them guessing, have them trying to get up close to it, trying to figure out what's going on. Our player could run right past this door and have no idea that they're able to open it. So the next thing we're going to look at is we're going to look at adding what's called a text render actor. So a text render actor is just going to be an actor, right? It's going to be an object inside of our world, if we remember that vocabulary word. An actor in Unreal is any object in our world. And this one is going to render text. It's going to draw words on the screen. So I'm going to create a text render actor. I'm going to put it next to our door. And we're going to take a look at changing the text that's on that door each time the player enters the trigger and changing it back to something else when they leave the trigger. To create our text render actor, I'm going to go up to this quickly add button. We're going to go to all classes. And under here, we can start typing for text render actor. And now we have a text render actor added to the world. I'm going to notice that this one that I added is it's backwards. It's on the other side of my object. It's turned around this way. So I'm going to move it into place to work from this side of my game. And then with that object selected, there's another one in the world. We'll actually see this on the outside. It says third person tutorial. But here's the one that I just created. I'm going to rename it. Double click there to bring it up. And I'm going to rename this as my door text. And then under the settings, under the details, I'm going to be able to change information about this object. So I can change what text shows up. So this is where it's going to end up. We want to say press E to open. Right? So if I select that, I move away. There's my press E to open. My horizontal alignment is how it's going to be aligned. I'm going to align it center so that no matter how big or little we make the text, it's centered where it needs to be. I'm going to move mine up to a little more interesting location there. We can change the fonts as we work on them. We can change these different alignments. But I'm just going to leave mine this way where it says press E to open. So I'm going to open up my key press trigger. Here's my trigger that operates on key press. I'm going to add another variable. And this variable is going to be our text render actor. And that's definitely going to be the type, right? So when we look for the type, we want to look for text render actor. And we want one object reference, one specific one in the world. And we want to make that exposed so that we can edit it. Now that we have that text render actor, what we can do is that when we overlap, when we walk into this trigger, we can take that actor. So I'm going to grab it and bring it out into the world. We're going to get it here. And I'm going to change its text. So I'm going to set the text of the text render actor. So when I selected set text, it automatically made this, change the text render actor, grab the actual text component. And we're going to be able to change this to whatever text we put inside of this value, right? So here I'm going to promote this to a variable. So promoting a pin to a variable means that it's no longer going to just be a pin that we connect to. It's actually going to make a variable for us. So here we go. I promoted it to a variable over here. This is of type value. And I'm actually going to change this text from value to interaction text and set that to active. So there we go. Here's our interaction text. And now we're going to set the text whenever we overlap to whatever is inside of that variable of interaction text. We're going to do a similar thing here. So grab that text render actor. I'm going to get that. We're going to call set text. It's going to automatically give us this class change so that it changes it to what it needs to be. And then we're going to hook these up. And this value is not our interaction text. If I promote that to our variable, it's going to be no interaction text. And we will expose that as well. All right, so now we have it that when we overlap, we change the text to be whatever's in interaction text. When we end overlapping, we change the text to what's in no longer an interacting text. So the thing to learn here is not just to copy this blueprint, it's to understand what the blueprint is doing. So again, practice reading this blueprint, practice understanding what these nodes do, and think about how you could do other things with them that aren't necessarily in this setup. So for example, we could set a text render actor anywhere in the world so that when you overlap it, when you walk on top of it, it's going to change the text so that you can have tutorial text, you can have information about your level. There's lots of things we can do with this text. So if I go back to Unreal, I've got my text here. I've got my door press trigger. It's going to need a text render actor. I want to change the one for door text. That's what this one was named. I'm going to change the text that when you interact with it, it's going to say press E to open. And when there's no interaction text, I'm just going to leave that an empty space. It's not going to say anything. That'll make my text kind of disappear. It doesn't say anything because it's blank. There's nothing there. Now, when I press play and I start this off, one of the things we're going to notice, beyond it being on the other side, right, is that it already has text that's there, that's set up. Because by default, it's going to have that default text that I put in that location. Then when I overlap, it changes to the text I wrote, and then I end overlap. So because it doesn't read interaction or no interaction on the start of our game, as our game begins, right, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to start that text off in a neutral way. So I'm going to select that text render actor now that I know that it is in the right position. And I'm just going to make sure that the text starts empty with nothing in there. So I'm going to delete all that text out of it. That way you can't see any text when you start. So here we go. We start. There's no text whatsoever. If I run into my trigger, sure enough, there's my press E to open. I step away, it goes away. And then it only happens when I'm in that trigger. So it only happens when I'm able to press E. All right, if I take a look at my door key press blueprint, we can see that this blueprint is getting pretty busy. There's going to be a lot of stuff that's going on, right? So what we may want to do is we may want to create some other events that are going to allow us to organize and better understand how our code is going to be set up. Kind of make it easier for everyone to read, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create some events, and we're going to move some of this information onto those events just to make our code a little easier to understand. This process of changing your code in a way that doesn't affect the way the game works, but it affects how easy it is to read and work with your code, this is called refactoring. Refactoring is something that's extremely valuable to do. You want to make sure that as you're working on projects, that you schedule time to go back and refactor your code to make it easier to work with. The last thing you want is to be able to come back to a script like this, a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, if you have a long-running online game. You don't want to come back years later and try to figure out what this does. You want to make it as easy to read as possible so you don't have to struggle to figure out what it does when that time comes. So to do this, I'm going to add 2 new events, right? So we're going to right-click and we're going to create a custom event. So here's Add Custom Event. The first custom event I'm going to make is just when we begin overlapping, right? This is where we're going to want to do these things to activate, right? So we're going to want to activate our activate door trigger, and I'll make another custom event for deactivate door trigger. And then we can start to define these as separate items. So I could grab all these things here that count as activating the door, right? I'm going to break this link. And those are going to be my things I do when I activate the door trigger. So coming off my true, I'm going to call activate door trigger. So now this idea is a lot easier to read. It's just going to say, when I begin overlapping, okay, it's just going to check my class. If it's true, it's going to activate the door trigger. I don't need to worry about what activate door trigger means unless I really want to figure out how that goes. Same idea with my deactivate the door trigger. So I can break this link and we can grab all of these pieces and we can move them to where we deactivate the door trigger. So deactivate door trigger is going to now call this event. And this will allow us to make this easier to read. And so take the time as you work on these scripts to really organize them and make them look nice, make them easy to read. The next tool that we can use to make these easy to read is that I can actually select some of these areas. So if here's my area, right, I can select this and I can press the C key for comment. And this will allow me to create a comment that describes what this code does. So this comment can be like, check if player is in trigger. And that's the same idea here. C, check if player is in trigger. And so now our code starts to really become easy to read. I know that when I begin overlapping, I'm going to check if the player is in the trigger. If so, we activate the door trigger. If it's not, then we deactivate the door trigger, right? And so this idea of like making your code easy to read by adding comments is going to be extremely helpful. So take some time to go through the code that you've made so far. Take some time to think about the tools that we've learned and ask yourself, what interesting things can I do? What kind of cool levels can I build with what I already know? And get ready to use those to build our first project. In our next lecture, we're going to look at how to take this interaction point and we're going to move it to an object or a keypad that's on the other side of the level, that's somewhere else. Good news is this is going to be really easy with the work that we've already done. We should be able to figure this out on our own and do it really quickly and easily. I'll see you in those lessons.